Hello and welcome, this is Redditosker. Today I want to talk about the discourse around gatekeeping and cheesing bosses in Elden Ring. I've wanted to talk about this topic for a while, and today provides me with a good opportunity to get into it. Because Fighting Cowboy, a very large and very popular Dark Souls and Elden Ring YouTuber, posted this tweet, talking about precisely those issues. The tweet reads, "I don't know who needs to hear this, but powerful weapon arts, spells, ashen summons, etc. are not cheesing. They are literally just playing the game with the tools provided. You want to use 10-second infinite FP flask and Comet Azure? Go for it, it's still a victory." Souls has always had elitists, but Elden Ring has really brought these people out of the woodwork, like termites. Don't let anyone devalue your experience because they think you need to play with only normal weapons or no ashen summons. FromSoft gave us all this OP stuff for a reason. And they didn't accidentally add a bunch of weapon arts and summons and not think people would explode bosses with them. This is by design, and to think otherwise is just fooling yourself. Okay, so I disagree with Fighting Cowboy's assessment here. I think he's simply wrong. And I'll get into that in a moment. But first, I want to say that I understand the sentiment behind what he's saying. And in a broad sense, I agree with that sentiment. What I think he's trying to talk about, is an issue of legitimacy. There are a lot of people in the Souls community that don't think a win is legitimate if you don't beat the boss a certain way. They don't consider it a legitimate win if you don't beat it by yourself. They don't consider it a legitimate win if you use ashen summons. They don't consider it a legitimate win if you use what is broadly considered overpowered spells or ashes of war or weapons. And because they don't view those wins as legitimate, they go out of their way to let people know that they don't consider it legitimate. And in this way, they diffuse into the community a sense of general disapproval for beating bosses and content in that way. And it is that atmosphere of disapproval that Fighting Cowboy doesn't like and is criticizing in these tweets. Now, like I said earlier, I generally agree with the sentiment. You shouldn't harass people because they didn't play the game the way that you feel is legitimate. They don't need to be constantly reminded that you don't think they actually beat the boss or played the game. But I take issue with Fighting Cowboy's statement that it's not cheesing. What is cheesing? I think most people would agree that in this context, cheesing is beating a boss without engaging with its mechanics. And the Comet Azure combined with Cerulean Hidden Tier definitely allow you to do that. They are 100% cheesing the boss. That doesn't mean that the fight is illegitimate in any way. It doesn't mean that you didn't really beat the boss. But it does mean that you circumvented the mechanics of the boss. You circumvented the entirety of the boss fight. And if cheesing means anything, that's what cheesing means. Okay, second point of contention. In his last tweet, Fighting Cowboy says that FromSoftware gave us all this overpowered stuff for a reason, that they didn't put it in there accidentally, and that all of this was by design, and to think otherwise is just fooling yourself. And he's wrong. Or at the very least, he's overstating things. It's not true that every single overpowered thing that FromSoftware put in the game was intended or by design. And I can prove that, because they nerfed a lot of the things that were previously overpowered. They nerfed Hoarfrost Stomp. They nerfed Bloody Slash, they nerfed the poise damage on the Moonveil. They nerfed the Sword of Night and Flame. They even patched some glitches that allowed you to skip certain bosses, which implies that this isn't simply about PvP weapon balance, this is also about the PvE game balance. Now, to give Fighting Cowboy credit where it's due, there is still a lot of other stuff that's very overpowered, and I agree that overpoweredness is probably part of their game design. But it's also true that there are intended game mechanics, and that you are being guided to use and engage with those mechanics. And while they may want you to be overpowered, these patches show that that overpoweredness needs to exist within a certain narrow band that they find tolerable. That there is a limit to how overpowered they want you to be. Okay. Now, I think Fighting Cowboy knows all this. I think that his real point is an issue of legitimacy, like I said earlier. He doesn't like that there are people in the community that try and make other people's victories feel illegitimate. And he's right, you shouldn't do that. But now let's talk about that point. Because it's not that simple, there's more to it than this. And I've been watching people have this argument for like 10 years, and the entirety of that 10 years, all I keep seeing is people arguing past each other and not understand what the other person is saying. And now that I have a YouTube channel, I kind of want to put in my perspective and try and explain what I think is going on here. Now, I've explained what I think Fighting Cowboy's perspective is here. It's that people that try to delegitimize cheesing a boss are gatekeepers or elitists. His point being that they're bad, basically, and that their input is a detriment to the community. And this is a popular opinion. I think I would go so far as to say that this is the majority perspective. But my view is that while it's true that there are some people that are actually like that are actually doing that, there are also other people that get thrown under that umbrella that don't belong there, myself included. I have long advised people that on their first playthrough on a Souls game or on Elden Ring or Bloodborne or Sekiro, they should not look stuff up and they should not cheese the encounters. And that's not a commandment or a threat, it's advice. And giving that advice doesn't make me a gatekeeper. Because the reason that I say that isn't to restrict their style of play. It's because I want them to enjoy the game, and I think that their probability of enjoying the game goes down the less they engage with the game mechanics. This isn't really about legitimacy, this is about value. I think that engaging with a boss's mechanics and fighting him normally on your first playthrough is a more valuable experience than looking the boss up on YouTube and cheesing him your first time through. Both methods are legitimate, but one is more valuable. Because value is highly subjective, we each have to make a value judgment of our own accord and decide which one we think is the most valuable one. But we actually have no choice as to which one we pick. You already think one is more valuable than the other. You've made that judgment call, and so have I. And in my opinion, which I'm entitled to, not cheesing it will give you the more valuable experience. Now, that's not to say I'm going to go out of my way to bother you if you disagree with me. I'm not going to harass you online, and I'm not going to lose a single minute of sleep if someone out there disagrees with me and chooses to cheese a boss. But I'm still going to maintain that I generally advise people to try and beat bosses organically, at least their first playthrough. Because out of all the ways I've played, that's the way that I've learned to enjoy the games the most. Basically what I'm saying is that I think that two things can be true at once here. I agree with Fighting Cowboy's general sentiment, that you shouldn't go out of your way to try and make other people feel bad about their accomplishments. But I also don't like the idea that I have to pretend that I think that both experiences are equally valuable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with advising people not to cheese bosses their first time through. I think if you hold that opinion, it's okay to express that opinion to the broader Souls and Elden Ring community. But you should do it without insulting people. I think we all should just kind of stop insulting people. In fact, I think we should all come to an agreement. The pro-cheese side should stop calling people losers that live in their mother's basement, or stuff like that. And people on my side should stop labeling difficulty mitigation tools, like spirit summons, as From Software catering to the masses. And maybe if we do that, then we won't be having the same conversation another 10 years from now. And we can all just agree that it's okay if different people value experiences differently. And that's the end of this video. Please be sure to unsubscribe and unclick the bell notification. Hopefully I've managed to anger at least 1.5 sides of this argument. If so, please leave me a sarcastic and dismissive comment. The kind that has no real content but is designed only to make other people even angrier. And if this video hasn't alienated you enough to do that, then I'm sure I'll get to you in a future video. Until then, thank you very much for watching.